The wind howled across the empty stretch of highway, rattling the windows of the 18-wheeler as it barreled down the dark road. Mike Reynolds, a seasoned truck driver with years behind the wheel, had seen it all. Blinding snowstorms, reckless drivers, long nights that blurred into the next. But tonight felt different. There was an eerie stillness in the air, a quiet that settled deep in his chest. Maybe it was just exhaustion setting in, or maybe it was something else. His hands tightened around the steering wheel as his headlights cut through the darkness. Miles of open road stretched ahead, the occasional flicker of distant taillights, the only sign of life. Then, out of nowhere, a small shape emerged on the side of the road, barely visible in the dim glow of the truck's beams. Mike's heart kicked up a notch. At first, he thought it was a pile of debris, a worn-out tire or a chunk of wood, common sights along lonely highways. But as he got closer, a pair of frightened eyes reflected in his headlights. It wasn't just road debris. It was a dog. He barely had time to think. Instinct took over as he eased off the gas and flipped on his hazard lights. The massive truck groaned in protest as he pulled onto the shoulder, the tires crunching over loose gravel. The moment he stepped out, the bitter night air hit him like a slap. It smelled of damp asphalt and the distant scent of pine from the woods lining the road. The dog didn't move. It just sat there, curled into itself, shivering. Its fur was matted with dirt, patches of its coat missing. Mike had seen stray dogs before, but something about this one made his chest tighten. It wasn't just lost. It was waiting for help, for someone to stop, for something Mike couldn't quite put into words. He crouched a few feet away, keeping his voice low and steady. "Hey, buddy. You all alone out here?" The dog flinched but didn't run. Up close, Mike could see how thin it was, ribs pressing against its sides. It had a collar, but no tag. That meant someone had owned it once. Someone had cared. So why was it out here, abandoned on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere? Mike glanced around. No cars, no houses. Just the stretch of highway disappearing. Into the darkness, his gut twisted. Something about this didn't sit right. Carefully, he extended a hand, giving the dog a chance to sniff. It hesitated, eyes wary, but after a long moment, it took a shaky step forward. Mike felt its cold nose brush against his fingers. "That's it," he murmured. "You're okay now." He wasn't sure what made him do it, but the next thing he knew, he was scooping the dog into his arms. It was lighter than it should have been, its body limp with exhaustion. The moment he held it close, he felt it. Something damp on its fur. Not just rain, something stickier. Something that sent a chill racing down his spine. Blood. Mike's breath caught. This wasn't just a stray. Something had happened to this dog. Something bad. His pulse pounded as he carried it back to the truck, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He had no idea what he was getting himself into. No idea that this single act, stopping for a dog on the side of the road, was about to change his life forever. Mike climbed into the cab, shutting the door behind him as the dog lay motionless in the passenger seat. The dim glow of the dashboard, lights flickered against its ragged fur. Up close, Mike could see the dried blood staining its side, but there was no way to tell if it was injured or if the blood belonged to something or someone else. His heart pounded as he turned the key, the truck's engine rumbling to life beneath him. He had a delivery deadline to meet, but how could he just leave the dog like this? His gut told him this was no ordinary stray. Someone had left it out here, and judging by its condition, it hadn't been by accident. Reaching for his thermos, he poured a few drops of water into his palm and held it out. The dog hesitated before weakly lapping it up. That was a good sign. "Yeah, you're thirsty, huh?" Mike muttered, glancing down at it. "We'll get you some food too. Just hang in there, buddy." He wasn't sure what made him feel so responsible. For the dog, maybe it was the way it looked at him, like it had been waiting for someone to care. Or maybe it was because, in some way, Mike knew what it felt like to be abandoned. As the truck rumbled back onto the road, he reached for his phone, scrolling through search results for the nearest vet. The closest one was nearly an hour away. He could call ahead, but what would he even say? He had no name, no story, just a half-starved, blood-stained dog that he couldn't bring himself to leave behind. The dog let out a low whimper, shifting slightly, but still too weak to move much. Mike's grip tightened on the wheel. Something about this whole situation gnawed at him. He had heard stories before, people dumping their pets, treating them like trash. But this didn't feel like that. Someone had put this dog here. But why? The thought made his skin prickle. His headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the lonely highway ahead. And then, just as he was shaking the thought, from his head, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mike frowned. He hadn't given his number to anyone recently, and truckers weren't exactly the kind of people who got random calls in the middle of the night. Against his better judgment, he swiped to answer. "Yeah?" Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate breath. "You should have kept driving." Mike's stomach turned to ice. The voice was low, measured, not rushed, not panicked, just calm. Too calm. His eyes darted to the dog. It hadn't moved, but suddenly, the whole situation felt bigger than a stranded animal. "Who is this?" Mike demanded. The line clicked dead. A chill ran down his spine. He stared at the screen for a second before tossing the phone onto the dash. Maybe it was a prank, a wrong number, or some truck stop weirdo messing around. Or maybe his gut clenched. No, he couldn't let his mind run wild. He had a dog to save, and that was the only thing that mattered right now. But the unease settled in deep, wrapping around him like a vice. Someone knew he had stopped. Someone knew he had picked up the dog. And if that call was any indication, someone didn't want him to. The road stretched on ahead, empty and silent. But for the first time in his life, Mike felt like he wasn't alone. Mike's fingers drummed against the steering wheel, his mind racing. The unknown call still echoed in his ears, sending an uneasy shiver down his spine. He glanced at the dog, still curled up in the passenger seat. Its breathing slow, but steady. Whoever had left that message, whoever was watching, knew about the dog, and they weren't happy he had stopped. His truck rumbled down the quiet highway, the distant glow of a gas station breaking through the darkness. He needed to stop, get some food and water for the dog, and maybe clear his head. Pulling into the empty lot, he killed the engine and reached for his phone again. No new calls, no messages, just the silence of the night pressing in around him. The convenience store was nearly empty. Just an older cashier flipping through a magazine behind the counter. Mike grabbed a couple of bottled waters, a bag of beef jerky, and a small pack of dog food from the limited pet aisle. As he paid, he felt eyes on him. An instinct every trucker develops after years on the road. He turned, scanning the store. Nothing. Just the flickering neon sign outside and the occasional hum of a passing car. Shaking it off, he returned to the truck and poured water into an empty coffee cup, setting it in front of the dog. It sniffed weakly before lapping at the water, its tail giving the faintest wag. "That's more like it," Mike muttered, letting out a breath he hadn't realized. He was holding, but as he leaned back, something caught his eye. A car parked at the far end of the lot, headlights off, just sitting there. His stomach tightened. He wasn't the paranoid type, but after that call, He wasn't about to ignore his gut. Whoever was in that car wasn't here for a late night snack. Keeping his movements casual, he started the engine, pretending not to notice as he pulled out of the lot. In his mirror, the car hesitated for a moment before its headlights flicked on. Mike exhaled sharply. They were following him. He pushed the truck a little harder. The weight of the trailer groaning against the acceleration. The car stayed right behind him, never too close, but never far enough to be coincidence. "All right, buddy," Mike murmured, glancing at the dog. "Looks like we've got company." The dog blinked up at him, unaware of the tension in the air. Mike's mind worked fast. He could call the cops, but what would he even say? That he picked up a stray dog, got a creepy phone call, and now someone was tailing him. They'd write him off as some exhausted trucker seeing things. Up ahead, an exit sign for a rest stop appeared. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the open highway. Without hesitation, he took the turn, pulling into the dimly lit lot. The car hesitated at the entrance before rolling in slowly, parking several spaces away. Mike killed the engine and sat there, his pulse steady but alert. The car door creaked open, and a figure stepped out. A man, mid-40s, rough-looking, the kind of guy who didn't stop to make friends. Mike opened his own door, stepping onto the pavement, making sure to keep the truck between them. "Something I can help you with," he called out, his voice firm. The man didn't answer at first. He took a slow step forward, his hands in his jacket pockets. Then he spoke. "That dog ain't yours." Mike's jaw tightened. "Didn't seem to belong to anyone when I found it bleeding on the side of the road." The man let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You don't know what you're messing with, driver. That dog? It's not just some stray." Mike's grip on the door handle tightened. "Then whose is it?" The man's expression darkened. "Let's just say, some people paid a lot of money for it, and they don't like losing what's theirs." Mike's stomach turned. He'd heard of things like this. Illegal breeding operations, fighting rings, all kinds of cruelty that made his blood boil. And this dog had been caught up in something dark. "Well," Mike said, his voice calm but firm, "if those people want it, it's so bad. They shouldn't have left it for dead." The man took another step forward. But before he could say anything else, a low growl came from behind Mike. The dog had lifted its head, weak but alert, its body tense, its eyes locked onto the stranger, and for the first time since Mike found it, there was fire in its expression. The man hesitated. Mike saw his chance. "Here's what's gonna happen," he said, stepping between the man and the truck. "You're gonna get back in your car and drive away. And if you don't, well, I may just make a call to some people who would be real interested in hearing about this little operation of yours." The man's jaw tightened. For a second, Mike thought he might push back, but then, without another word, he turned on his heel and walked back to his car. The engine roared to life, and within moments, the vehicle disappeared into the night. Mike let out a breath, his muscles finally relaxing. He turned to the dog, reaching out to scratch behind its ears. "Looks like you and me just made some enemies." "Huh?" The dog, despite its exhaustion, wagged its tail. Mike climbed back into the truck, the weight of the moment settling over him. He didn't know what the future held for this dog, but one thing was clear. He wasn't about to let it end up in the wrong hands again. As the truck rumbled back onto the road, the first hints of dawn painted the horizon. For the first time, in a long time, Mike felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be.